Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Building the Empire, hosted by the Commercial Real Estate Group at Georgia State University. This is our first episode of the fall 23 semester, and it's really an amazing one. In today's episode, myself, Payton Broaddus, and Ade Sanusi have a great conversation with Mr. Egbert Perry, Chairman and CEO of the Integral Group. This is a really special episode, and we hope you guys enjoy this one as much as we did.
But thank you so much, Egbert, for spending the time with us. We really appreciate it. This is going to be a treat for our members and everybody who gets to listen to this, and we're super excited. So thanks again.
You're welcome. Okay.
All right, well, let's kick it off. I've had the pleasure of knowing you for a good amount of time now. You've known me for a long time, and we've gotten to have many discussions, and it's been a privilege hearing from you and also watching and learning from you. But we never really got the chance to start off from the beginning. And just to start from the origin story in the Caribbean, in Antigua, talk to us about sort of what your early childhood looked like, what it was like, and how it sort of served as the foundation for your future and your career.
Well, I always think of Antigua as I call it the proverbial African village, playing on the concept that it takes a village to raise a child. And I grew up in such a place where the life of the adults were all centered around looking out for the development and interests of the children. And so for me, it was a little piece of heaven on earth. It was great tropical weather, and at the same time, that familial environment made it really great. I am number 9 of 11 kids, and blessed to have great parents. And I, like most people from the islands, if you're depending on whether you're from the English-speaking Caribbean or Dutch or French or Spanish-speaking, you end up, because most of the islands are small, certainly the ones in the Eastern Caribbean, which is where Antigua is, they're much smaller, so chances are they're too small to support a university system. So if you go to school there, if you have interest beyond high school, you're going to have to leave home. And if you're from the English-speaking Caribbean, you end up going to either the UK or the US or Canada to continue your education. There is a University of the West Indies, which is a great institution, but it only takes so many students per year from the entire Caribbean. So most people plan to have to go abroad to study. And so our family was a US family. So I ended up getting a scholarship to continue my education in the US. So I came to the US to finish my last 2 years of high school, and then went to college in Philadelphia and just kept on that path. And so, as an immigrant story, all immigrant stories have a lot of similarities, at the same time, enough difference to make you have your own unique story, but it's not that different than what most immigrants who leave not running from something bad, but in pursuit of furthering their education and professional goals, what their journey looks like. And mine is just one of those.
But before we jump even further to your migration to the U.S., what was it like growing up in a full house like that? What were the pastimes? What were you doing with your siblings? What was that time like?
But if you know the Caribbean back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, very, very, very strong disciplinarian type environments. So it was common to get a beating, misbehaving. I was the last boy of the 11, and I have 2 younger sisters. But it was not uncommon to have little cliques within the family that always seemed to be getting in their own little band of trouble. And so I was probably not a well-behaved child. So while I always managed to get excellent grades in school, I always got a C for conduct. And so I could bring home the best grades possible, but I would always still get a beating because of that C for conduct. And my mother, if I look back at it, I probably got beaten on average twice a day for most of my life, all of my life that I can remember at home. And believe me, I deserved every one of them, and maybe some more that I didn't get beaten. But the islands was very education focused. Everybody was poor, but all the adults thought that the answer was education. So there was a high expectation on everyone, not just within my family, but in much of the island. It was all about education. And so it was just great. I mean, I could say great 10 more times and it still wouldn't quite convey just how nice it was growing up in that environment. I could probably do a, what do they call it, Groundhog Day, where I could play over those about 10 years of my life from like 5 to 15, just play that over 1,000 times, and that would be great for me.
Now, I grew up in a Nigerian household, so I had my fair share of beatings, but I can say I definitely didn't have twice, two times a day.
Yes, but you probably were not as bad. That's what
Maybe I wasn't, but transitioning to your time to America, what was first, getting to the country like? What was the first like, mouth-dropping moment for you in comparison to what you grew up knowing in the islands?
Oh, there were, now I could probably mention 1,000 things because, and the tallest building in Antigua was, I think, a 3-story building. So just imagine your first trip out of the country, you're flying into a place with skyscrapers and so on. So that alone was a shock. I remember coming through the airport, and when I got to the sidewalk, I came through JFK, John F. Kennedy Airport in New York. And when I got outside, I paused and said to my sister, I had a sister living here at the time. I said, you know what? I just realized I went through that entire airport and I never had to push a door open. Everything opened automatically. Well, we didn't have that in Antigua. So a lot of little things and a lot of big things there was huge culture shock. I mean, just every single day. And the amount of plenty that existed that just seemed like you're in a land of riches relative to back home. Maybe a land of excesses, but land of riches nonetheless.
So as you're coming into the United States and kind of getting your bearings straight, getting settled in, finishing up high school, then you go to University of Pennsylvania. Can you kind of talk to us a little bit about why did you choose civil engineering, for both your undergrad, and then you went and got a master's in it? What was the thought process there? Was commercial real estate in your mind at the time?
I never thought about commercial real estate. There was no such concept in my mind at the time. We didn't have a career in Antigua named commercial real estate. Obviously, people were practicing real estate, but the only thing in those days, the only careers that your parents told you had to do, you had to either be a doctor, a lawyer, a CPA, they call it chartered accountant, or an engineer. And that was it. Those were the only professions that people thought about. There was no biochemistry and computer science and so many of the things that young people today think about. It was pretty simple, pretty basic. Most people in my generation, there were just a few positions that mattered. And left to my mother and father, but mother more than father, all of us were supposed to become doctors. None of us had an interest in medicine. But we were all in quantitative fields. And I got to civil engineering because one of the things I did a lot of on Sundays with my siblings, the ones that were one brother 2 years older than I, a sister 2 years younger, and then another sister 3 years younger than that one. The four of us were sort of a little clique. The others had gone away to school, and the four of us were left. And one of the pastimes on Sunday was to look through the pages of a Britannica encyclopedia. You may not know what that is, but it's actually a book with a lot of pages in it. And we would turn the pages and look at what was in the encyclopedia. And it was just fascinating. My oldest brother had gone away to college, and he had sent back home a box with encyclopedias in it. And one day I saw a suspension bridge, and I asked my father, who did that? What profession? And he said, civil engineer. Now, don't ask me how he knew, because we don't have any suspension bridges in Antigua. But he said civil engineer. I said, okay, I'm going to be a civil engineer. That's literally how I came up with it. Now, fast forward, I've never built or designed a suspension bridge. But I've kind of built a bridge of sorts. But that being said, I didn't really know what civil engineering was until about my second or third year in college. But it just sounded like, okay, that's what I was going to do, and that's it. And I wish I could say something more exciting than that, that I had this great vision, but no, it was just that simple.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's the simple decisions that pay off, and it seemed like it worked out pretty well. So when got your master's and then got your MBA, so you caught the bug for business somewhere in there. And curious to know, like in your time getting your MBA, was there anybody at this point in your career, like who are you looking up to? Who are your mentors? Like, was there anybody inspiring you in terms of entrepreneurship? Were there students from your class going to start their own businesses after they graduated with their MBA? Were you thinking about entrepreneurship then?
I did not. I didn't have. In looking back, I didn't have mentors at that stage in my life. Or let me change that. I didn't have anybody that I really paid attention to, because I did have a professor, Dr. Frederick Roll, who encouraged me to get my PhD in engineering. And it is one of my regrets, because my mother didn't speak to me for 6 months after I told her I was done with school. I had gotten all the degrees I wanted. I was not going to get a PhD, which disappointed her tremendously. She hung up the phone on me and didn't speak to me for 6 months. And the only reason she spoke to me later on, after 6 months, was because she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and was on her deathbed. So that stuck in my head. But in reflection, in college, Dr. Roll always told me that I had a head for engineering and I should really get my PhD. And when I decided to, and I was originally enrolled in the PhD program, and my roommate, who was my closest friend, convinced me that I wasn't going to do research or teaching, so I should get out of the PhD program and go to business school and get a degree in either finance or accounting. Well, I chose to do both, finance and accounting, but I did drop out of the engineering program for the PhD and limited it to my master's. So I decided to go on a master's track instead of the PhD track. There are many times I've regretted not doing the doctorate in engineering, both because I later realized that what seemed like a lifetime to spend another year to a year and a half was just a drop in the bucket, and that a year and a half was no time. And so I could have just done it. Also, the disappointment to my mother has always stuck in my head as well. So for those two reasons, nothing practical, but very emotional, I sort of wish I had done that. So I didn't have mentors advising me or mentors that I listened to advising me. And certainly I didn't have that within the family because my father and mother were not well educated academically from a classroom perspective. So that's it was just the luck of the draw, but in the final analysis, I'm good with it.
Well, it sounds like your roommate gave you some pretty good advice. So good thing you took that.
Well, the truth is, in reflection, I didn't have to do that. I always saw myself in somewhat of an entrepreneurial environment. We had a little store in Antigua when I was growing up. So my father was an entrepreneur, and we grew up in the poultry business. We were merchants and so on. So the idea of engaging in commerce was something that felt comfortable and natural for me. So it didn't take a lot to get me there. What he did do is get me out of the engineering program into the business program earlier than I would have. Chances are I would have gotten my PhD, gone out to work, and gone to school at night or so to get an MBA. Instead, I just stayed there, got it out my system one time, and was done. Is that good or bad? I really and truly don't know. Depending on the day of the year that I wake up, I have a different view of whether it was the right or wrong decision.
I mean, I think we all ask ourselves the big question, what if? But
Right.
then, all you can do is look back and say, well, I'm here.
Yes, that's right.
Nevertheless, though, when you were going to Penn, early on, you're sort of creating an idea of the type of person that you want to be. Did it become apparent to you that your journey was going to be a little bit different, as a Black man trying to pursue a career in engineering, perhaps business in the future? Did it become apparent to you that, a tall task would be ahead of you?
The truth is, I was very conscious of being Black. But as I said, I wasn't born in this country. I didn't grow up in this country. I did not experience in the earliest days in forming your sense of who you were. I was not stifled quite the same way this system is stifling to a young Black person. In the environment I grew up in, every position I saw, all the way from the top to the bottom, looked like me. So I didn't see limitations on possibilities. There was no proverbial foot on the neck or knee on the neck quite the same way it is in this country. Antigua is 90+% Black. So the idea and concept of race and just how brutal the racial dynamic was not the same for me growing up as it is for a Black person growing up in this country. So I operated as if whatever I wanted to do, I could do. Now, of course, I had been here long enough. I spent 7 years at Penn and 2 years in high school. So I had 9 years before I went out in the professional world. I already got the program. I understood the deal, the bargain. And I realized that being Black has a penalty associated with it, no question. Did I see it as stifling or crippling? No, it was just like cold weather. You put on your coat to go out and deal with the cold weather. It's cold, you don't walk out without a coat. Well, I was relating to the racism and the racial bias that way. And so it was just, you dress for the environment and you go outside prepared to encounter exactly what you knew was out there. And I went to Philadelphia. Frank Rizzo was mayor during my time at Penn. He was a racist, disgusting, sick human being sitting in the seat of mayor. And he declared war on anything Black that moved. And that was what Philadelphia was like during my time there. So I was between staring down a gun barrel for the police twice and spread eagle in the snow, handcuffed and put in a wagon, taken for identification, harassed by police regularly. Those were normal things. So there was no way you could go through and escape the reality of developing an understanding of where you were and what the outside world was like. This is what it is.
So, when you got through your time at Penn and finally you're starting your professional career, early on, what were some of the big revelations that you made, spending some time working in DC? What was that, first couple of years like?
I was only in DC for a year, and truth be told, I saw a glass ceiling early. And the thing about me is I was never driven by or motivated by money. I am my parents' child, certainly my father's child, and his ambitions were never to be rich. His view is that he was more of a, I'll help other people as long as I take care of my family and they get 3 meals and a set of values and a centon, they can build a life they need to build. And he did not need much, did not aspire to amass wealth. He was a pretty simple, straightforward kind of guy. And I am him, a not as good a version, because he got a lot more done with a hell of a lot less than I have been able to. But I think that I am a reflection of his values. And that being said, it meant that I generally did not have a lot of tolerance for things that I didn't have to tolerate. And so my tenure in DC was short. As soon as I saw the glass ceiling, I said, I don't really need this. And I just left. I actually turned down a job in New York on Wall Street that I actually didn't formally get the offer. I was told by the Wharton Placement Center that they could have me a job on Wall Street by a week from the day they were talking to me, earning about $35,000 to $40,000 a year. This is in 1978, 79. And if I would just ignore the fact that I was an engineer and focus on my finance degree. And I turned it down and went to work in DC for $19,500 a year. So one, clearly wasn't motivated by money, but two, didn't need to tolerate something that I found unacceptable. So I left DC very quickly to come to Atlanta.
Now, when it comes to, your time at DC and how you remember the city, what will you remember most about the city and living, in the nation's capital?
Uh, I know more about DC and appreciate it more now that I don't live there than when I was there. I didn't do the museum tours and look at the monuments and experience the city and so on. I literally lived in my apartment, drove to work, got there probably around 6:30 every morning, stayed in the trailer on site, worked until around 7 o'clock that night, went home and did that back and forth every day. Had a girlfriend there, so I would see her, but that was it. I did not really experience the city. It was unfortunate because DC is nice. I always say if I wasn't living in Atlanta and I was living in the States, DC would probably be where I would live. But it's a nice city, and in those days, my in-laws live in Rockville, Maryland, and so I spent a lot of time in Rockville, which is a suburb of DC.
So, Egbert, your time at working with H.J. Russell really seems like the catalyst for a lot of your success today. So, can you talk about how you even got to H.J. Russell in the first place? I know it was a little bit unorthodox of a story, and kind of how you guys built that relationship, and ultimately how he trusted you enough to, um, allow you to write the business plan and kind of run the show.
The irony of it is I did not even know how I got to Russell until I had been here in Atlanta about a year with Russell. As it turns out, I later found out he called me while I was in college. I had not yet graduated and wanted to know if I was interested in moving to Atlanta to work with his firm. I turned him down. I didn't really know how he knew to call me. And I had no interest in going to Atlanta because my girlfriend was in DC. So I was only going to go to DC. And so I went to DC. But that's also why I had a short fuse in terms of what I was going to tolerate in DC, because I had other options as I saw it. And so when I accepted, I was interviewed and offered a job one weekend while I was still with this firm in DC, and accepted. And I started in January of 80. But what I found out was the way he got to me was his daughter, Donata, was a freshman or sophomore at Penn when I was in my last year of grad school. And I did a lot of tutoring. I tutored a lot of students in calculus and sciences and business courses. And one of her roommates, I believe, I don't think it was her, maybe a roommate, was in one of my sessions and mentioned me to her. She then, and I had tutored enough students that she told me it was a familiar story or a familiar set of recommendations. She got my resume from the faculty administrator that ran the tutoring center and sent that resume to her father in Atlanta and told him he should try and recruit me to come to the company. So that's how he reached out to me. And when I finally decided to come, it was as assistant to the president, which I didn't really know what that meant. But out of that, I guess it was more the fact that I had an engineering education, but also a business education. He asked me to do the business plan. And I did the business plan and gave it to him. And I remember a Saturday sitting in his office for about 3.5 hours. We were talking through the plan and the strategy and so on. And this was in November of 80. So about 11 months after I had been with the firm. And at the time I was 25. And he said, okay, first of next month, I'm turning over all of the construction reins to you. And the construction operation was the heart of the company. And I had no idea what that meant. Was a little bit overwhelming. And I remember asking him to explain the job description to me. And he looked at me, kind of laughed, and then took the smile off his face and said, so you did the plan and you're asking me for a job description. Boy, you're a bigger fool than you look to be. And then he said, I'm going to give you the job description. You're heading up the company, go run the company, make sure you don't lose any of my money or it's your ass. That's the job description. And that was it. And I spent 12 more years and 1 month there. So I was there for a total of 13 years. And when I left, Russell was, its subsidiaries combined was about a $200 million a year company. And it had been about 10 to 12 million when it started. And I got a chance to do that and be there working with Herman. And therefore I owe a lot to him. I got an opportunity there I would never have gotten anywhere else. And he was a brilliant guy and gave this guy a shot. And so that's it. I mean, really just that simple, fortuitous, lucky, whatever you want to call it.
So was there, I'm sure there was, some projects that stood out in your time working with H.J. Russell. Any really notable projects that you were able to work on, or any initiatives that you started that, really helped the firm over your time?
The thing about Russell was, it was more the journey, the environment, and so on that mattered more than anything else. Yeah, there were a lot of great projects. We developed the first residential development in Birmingham in like 27 years. It started a rebirth of the southern part of downtown. Did a lot of work out at the airport for Delta Airlines. Was part of the team to build the Georgia Dome, joint ventured the development or the building of 191 Peachtree Carter Presidential Library. We built where the Peachtree Athletic Club is downtown. We did projects all over, did a lot of residential development projects in downtown Atlanta, as well as other parts of the state and some other cities in South Carolina and so on. So I got to do a lot of things, construction-wise, development-wise, property management, construction management, and a lot of leadership opportunities, whether it's going through Leadership Atlanta or serving on different boards and so on. So it's not, I wish I could say it's Project X or Project Y. It's really the combination of all of the different ways that I was exposed to the world of business, civic engagement, service, etc., that taken together, just looking with the benefit of the rearview mirror, appreciating the opportunity that I had.
So as you took over at a young age, I'm sure you were faced with a lot of uncertainty and what's the best direction forward. So curious to know how did you learn how to deal with uncertainty and making big decisions that affected a lot of other people besides just you, and how did you kind of develop that mindset over time of not knowing the best way forward, but just going forward anyways?
At my core, I am analytical. And so they always say a problem 100% defined is a problem half solved. If you can identify the problem and put it down with clarity as to what exactly it is you're trying to solve, you've gotten half of the way to it solving it. A lot of times we do things without fully understanding what it is we're trying to solve. And so I was always analytical or thoughtful about, and I thought I had common sense. So that goes a long way. But at the end of the day, experience matters. And one of the more important decisions I made when I was at Russell was to hire some veterans in the construction industry, bring them in, I identified a half a dozen people that would be under those individuals. And those half a dozen people, among them would be the next generation of leadership for the company. And that turned out to be a wise decision because it accelerated the learning curve for some of those individuals and got me to a point where the breadth and depth of the company was expanded dramatically in a short period of time, which gave us a lot of the capability that we developed as a company and accelerated the growth. I think that was a pivotal decision. It's the recognition that experience matters. The never lose sight of what it is you're trying to get done, and then be as disciplined and, let's say, consistent in your pursuit of that goal, and everything else that shows up as an obstacle is just that, an obstacle you have to knock down or overcome on the way there. So it was really fundamental. I know you're looking for or expecting something just really exciting and boom, here it is. This is the magic. And there really wasn't any of that. It was just, do the work.
There's a quote that Payton and I liked recently, and somebody said the magic you're looking for exists in the things that you're avoiding, which oftentimes is the work. So I think we both can very much so agree with that. But building off of that note of you being, a logical thinker and making decisions uncertain, being an entrepreneur in many sense is a very, irrational decision when it comes from, the risks that you're taking on. It's not always the most logical decision for everybody. So how did you know when you were ready to break off and go on your own path? What were the emotions that were tied to it? Could you touch on just initially, setting the framework for Integral and the task you're about to take on?
Integral was a result of passion. It was that person in me that I said looked a lot like my father. And that was, I had seen over the 13 years at Russell an environment where a lot of people that looked like me were living in an environment where their poverty, had been criminalized. Poverty was a crime, and the sentence for that crime was that you were going to get the worst educational option in life and live in the worst environments, therefore setting your trajectory downward before you ever came out the womb. I grew up in an environment where poverty wasn't a crime because everybody was poor. And so they were not prepared to accept that everybody was a criminal. And so I wanted to take on the revitalization of communities, largely in urban centers, to change the trajectory for so many people. But I did not believe in it as a social enterprise. I was at my core entrepreneurial, and therefore I was going to approach it as if it was a business. I was going to figure out a way to do well while doing good, not do good while doing well, because the fundamental charge was to do something good, and we're going to do well while we're doing it. And doing well meant being able to have a business rationale overlay how we went about doing what we're doing, so that over time it would be sustainable. The idea of begging for subsidy to do things is not a business plan, or at least not the business plan I wanted to follow. So
So how
it had to make economic sense. So the idea that you were going to deliver product in a way that was economically viable or build communities that could be economically sustainable were principles that were foundational to how we would go about doing the work.
Two-part question. How did you go about, creating that initial business model? And when we think about, the Integral brand, many people think of Centennial Place and how huge that project was, not just to Atlanta, but also to the rest of the nation and how they took on that model. What was the history behind that, that deal? What made it so monumental to you personally? And what was, the biggest challenge in going through that?
Well, that the truth is the way the idea came about and what drove me leaving Russell to start Integral would come to life or play out in Centennial Place. My roommate in college, one of my roommates, who became my closest friend, I actually met him at the high school I finished in New York. His name was Clyde Gums. Clyde, one day in about a year before I left Russell, I was going to New York on business with Russell in mind. And Clyde was working at the Bank of New York. He was in the legal department and in credit. He was an MBA JD at Penn. And he was at the Bank of New York at that time about 12 years. And he picked me up and drove me to the meeting on the east side of Manhattan. He took me through a very circuitous route, took me through Harlem. I arrived at a building in the east side of Manhattan, and he reflectively asked, okay, so why does that look like that, and what would it take to make that look like this? Meaning, why did the trip through Harlem look so desolate and desperate, and or show so much desolation and desperation? And what would it take to make that look like where we were sitting in the east side of Manhattan? And after declaring an inability to answer the question, I reframed the question to, what would it take for me to want to live there? And what I described was a holistic community that was a proxy for what I grew up in Antigua. And he then challenged me that, given the extemporaneous nature of my response, the thoughtfulness and the passion that came out in the response, that I should consider leaving whatever it is I was doing and do that for my life. And I said immediately, instinctively, okay, I'll do it if you leave what you're doing and we do it together. And literally that day we decided we were going to create the Integral Group. And we didn't come up with the name at the time, but that we were going to create a company to revitalize urban America. So that's how the idea came about. I would say that's how the idea got legs, because clearly I could deliver the message extemporaneously because I had been thinking about it during my years at Russell as I saw more and more and more of the landscape that was out there. But that said, that's the day the idea actually took flight. Now, what was special about it and what Centennial Place represents is it's the first time that the idea of developing a housing solution became more than that and became a more holistic notion of early childhood development, school, YMCA, mixed income housing, rental and ownership, and so on, with a large constituency being poor people, and for whom the community, well, let's say the community was designed to help those people make it into a more mainstreamed living environment, as opposed to concentrated poverty, generally known as the projects. And so it was an early version of self-actualization for me. So that's what the significance of Centennial is. And we partnered with another firm to really work on the housing component. And it's a firm that had done some mixed income housing, a different kind of structure, but mixed income housing before. But it was the converting what was supposed to be a housing development into community development. And so that was the significance. It was the realization that we weren't building housing, we were trying to create a community.
Now, since then, you've been able to do phenomenal work, numerous projects, a lot of them in which I know pretty intimately. And I can say that, you guys don't just specialize in one lane, you're diversified, not only across, of course, asset classes, but also in the impact that you guys have made in different communities as well, different impacts. When you think about the future of Integral beyond you, what do you really see for it? And then also, your future beyond Integral, what's on the horizons for you as you look out into the distant future?
Well, for Integral, I would hope that I would leave, the existing leadership team would leave a DNA for the next generation of leadership to be informed about what is fundamental or important to the organization as the next chapter is charted. I won't chart that chapter, but I would hope that the first 30 years will have set the plate for, or set the table for the next chapter. I would hope that we would continue to be relevant and impactful in the work we do. And so it's important to pick leadership that will take us to that next place, whatever that looks like. The one thing we know is change will come. The only thing that's predictable is change, right? Now, what that change looks like is a different thing, but you must be grounded in some kind of ideology or principles. And so now, as far as I go, I'm probably too old to change who I am. So I will continue to be at my core what you see. But I think I've always been more a citizen of the world than Antigua or America or whatever. And so I would hope that my activities in the future would be more global than local. What that looks like, I'm still trying to answer that question. When you can think of a good answer, maybe you can help me with the answer. Right now,
Nigeria?
Yes, well, that would definitely be a challenge. But yeah, no, I mean, it is likely to be places where I have an affinity. And so it's not the geography where I would be located that matters. It's the work I do and whose lives I'm trying to impact. And no doubt it will continue to be very Afrocentric in my pursuits. I think that's a group I feel an affinity to for obvious reasons, but also I always go with and support the underdog. So that's who I am.
Well, we look forward to seeing the future of Integral and the work that you guys continue to do and the impact that you guys continue to make. As we end it off here, Egbert, I know we're coming up on time here, but last question. So what do you see for the future of Atlanta, and how would you like to see the new generation of commercial real estate professionals involved, in real estate and community development? How would you like to see them kind of get involved in the scene?
That's a great question. I think if professionals in real estate were guided, whether formally or informally, by a redefinition of what highest and best use means, it would go a long way. Highest and best use, I think, is a great notion and a great concept to help you come up with values of real estate, in terms of what's possible, what can you do with the real estate. But the notion of how we define it is flawed, because it is almost all quantitatively based and not qualitatively based. So we think we're building to a highest and best use standard, but the casualties created as a result of that pursuit means it could not be highest and best use, because we create traffic issues, we create housing inequality issues, we create environmental issues, and even though we meet the highest and best use standard. And so if real estate professionals stop being consumed by maximization of return, economic returns from assets, and integrate some more social impacts into the calculus, that would go a long way towards creating more equitable societies. And I think real estate professionals are afforded the opportunity to do that more than most. Politicians can talk about it, but they're not practitioners. Designers can talk about it, but they do not execute. They have a hand in what gets built because they design the built environment, but the ability to mesh how financial resources come to the table and what those financial resources are directed to its achieving those things lie within the domain of the real estate professionals. And that's why real estate is important if we want to change what our communities look like.
So in sum, we need more Egbert Perrys in the world. I think is a good sum of that.
Enough, but we need evolutions of
Exactly. Well, Egbert, thank you so much for taking the time. Before we let you go, we like to ask all of our guests, who do you think we should speak to next? Anyone come to mind?
There are a lot of people out there.
Maybe even a better question, who can you connect
probably,
us to speak with next?
Well, this person is probably already on your list, but I think of Dallas Smith, T. Dallas Smith, of T. Dallas Smith and Company. Absolutely. He would be one. I'm a fan. I know the guy. I know what he is doing to change the real estate industry, how it looks, how it's approached, and he's set some pretty high bars for himself and his company. But yes, that's somebody.
Agreed. Okay, great. Thank you for that. Yeah, we've got to get Dallas on the pod for sure. But thanks again, Egbert. Really appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time. It was a great conversation.